This video is all about God's response to our problem. In a previous video, we made the observation that sin is man's biggest problem. And it's a problem that on our own we can't really solve. It's a problem that leads to death, and ultimately it leads to separation from God. But sin does require a solution if we are going to get back to having a good relationship with the one who created us. And there is good news. The pages of the Bible contain a message of hope for all people, regardless of background, because God responded to our problem and put a plan into place to solve this biggest problem of ours. God responded by sending His Son into the world. Notice what John chapter 1 and verse 1 says. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, if you read down a few verses in the very same chapter, in verse 14, it says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us." What this tells us is that God's Son, Jesus, was the Word. And not only was the Word God, but the Word became like us. He became flesh and He dwelt among us. And so Jesus is God's response to our biggest problem. Jesus is the proof of God's love for His creation and His desire to have a relationship with us. God not only sent His Son into the world, but He also sent His Son into the world to live perfectly. Jesus is God's response to our problem. It might be natural at this point to ask the question, how is Jesus, God's Son, God's response to the problem of sin? Well, remember what the consequence of sin is. In the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve sinned, the result was death entering into the world and separation from God. As sinful people, we deserve that very same punishment for our sins. And this is where Jesus, the Son of God, comes into the picture. God responded to our problem and sent Jesus so that He could live on earth and ultimately, though He never did anything wrong, die for our sins. And God responded in this way so that everyone who believed in Jesus could avoid eternal death and the eternal consequences of sin and truly live. So God sent His Son into the world to die in our place so that we could live. 1 John chapter 4 and verse 9 says this, "In this the love of God was made manifest among us, that God sent His only Son into the world so that we might live through Him." What a remarkable response on God's part to our greatest problem, even though ultimately we don't deserve this response. God still responded. He still sent Jesus, and it is a testament to the unbelievable love and patience of God and Jesus. And on our part, we owe everything to God's response to our problem of sin.